Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Channeling History. By now, you should know that we're the only show where we speak to the souls that made things happen, and all of our guests are on the other side. We're brought to you on the Para X Radio Network. I'm Barry Strohm, your host, and I will be doing the channeling tonight. Good.
I'd like to thank you for tuning in to our show this evening. I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host. Our guests tonight are the spirits of Susan B. Anthony, one of the foremost leaders in early efforts of for women to gain equal rights and the right to vote, and Margaret Thatcher, the first female Prime Minister of Great Britain. We'll be dedicating the show this evening to the battle for women's equality and rights.
Now, when we begin channeling tonight, Connie, as usual, will ask the questions, and I'll answer in the words of the spirits.
We have a relatively active chat room here on ParaX, and we welcome your questions, but please keep in mind that we do have time restraints and may not have time to use all of those questions. All of our shows are available on our YouTube channel. It's in Barry's name, and our last name is spelled S like in Sam, T-R-O-H-M like in Mary.
Okay, you can hear us on many other internet platforms such as Spotify, Audible, iTunes, Pandora, and many more. One thing we always do is we give a disclaimer because we have no idea what the spirits are going to tell us. So the opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits, do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the Parax Network or of our sponsors. Now, as you probably already know that before we channel, we always say a prayer of protection. There's evil out there, and when we open a channel, it's possible that they will try to make an entrance. So anyway, Connie, say the prayer, and we'll begin to channel with our two wonderful women guests tonight.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God. Amen. Susan Anthony, we will start with you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm really anxious to ask you some questions and hear your answers. Would you like to begin with a comment?
Absolutely. I would not pass up that opportunity. It's been quite a while since I've been able to speak to anyone. In my day, they've treated women like a possession. We had very little rights. The Constitution was basically written for men. We could not do much of the things that men could do. We were not allowed to vote. It was almost impossible for women to get a divorce. A man could beat his wife, and she had very little recourse. History tends to forget just how bad women were treated. I felt that I could make a difference. I tried, I did many things, and I fought. I fought for many, many years, and I died before women got a chance to vote. But at least in 1920, they were given that right. Today, I still see women fighting. Now, things are much, much better. My friend here, Mrs. Thatcher, she accomplished incredible things for a woman. She truly broke the glass ceiling and did magnificent things with her life. So I do want any young women out there to understand that anything that they want to do is now possible. We fought for those rights, and many of us sacrificed much. But today, women and men are are pretty much equal. Now, there are still salary differentials, and men are often promoted ahead of women, but things are improving. I'm so proud of what women are accomplishing. So, Connie, I know you have a bunch of questions for me.
I do. Could you start by telling us about your family and your religious upbringing?
I was brought up in a very, very strict Quaker background. It was in those early days, and this was the early 1800s, the Quakers were very emphatic about how they lived their lives. They wore plain clothes. Women had basically no rights. The men made all of the decisions. When you're raised in a background like that, you tend to rebel against it. Now, I did maintain my Quaker beliefs, and I think that it gave me those beliefs gave me a lot of strength. But the background upon which I was raised was anything but liberal. It was, I guess, a good thing because it helped shape what my life would be. But it was a very difficult way to live.
What effect would you say your Quaker background had on your activist activities?
I had to pretty much put my Quaker background behind me to be an activist. The Quakers pretty much left others alone and lived their lives. But I wanted women to be treated equally with men. In the Quaker religion, that would have been impossible. So I had to break away from it. While I did often attend Quaker meetings, I didn't really practice the religion as such. I became much more liberalized in my ideas. I knew what I wanted. People often called me very bullheaded, and perhaps I was in many ways. But to accomplish anything in those days, you basically had to be very, very dedicated to your ideals. So yes, in one respect, my Quaker background helped, but in many, many others, it did not.
Hey, could you expand on how women were treated in the 1800s?
Women were expected to get married at an early age, to have children, to do the cooking, help take care of the farm. You see, in those days, America was very rural. Yes, there were some large cities, but the vast majority of people lived in the country. It was a very, very hard life. If you did not do what you needed to do to grow the farm, to grow the food, to maintain the cattle, to do what you needed, then you would simply run out of food. And birth control was basically non-existent in those days. It was a time of large families. It was not uncommon that a woman would bear 10, 12 children because those children were expected to work on the farms. Children were the cheapest source of labor in those days. So women had very, very little rights.
Why didn't men want women to speak in public? What was their problem with that?
Women were not educated in those days. The men, they were the well-educated ones. They were the attorneys. They felt that women were not equal, that they were not capable of holding a distinct conversation. Men felt that women did not possess the ability to compete with men. A woman's place was in the home. It was having children. It was doing everything but speaking in public. Men truly resented the presence of women in public.
Did women have any legal rights at that time?
They had a few. If you killed a woman, you would probably be penalized for it. I guess that's a legal right. Women, as I keep saying, it was just simply a very, very difficult time for women. There were some women that were educated, but they were only the wealthy women. The average woman, she basically had zero education. And yes, in certain instances, they just simply weren't educated properly that they could compete with men.
What was your opinion about people of color?
I was a very strict abolitionist. I thought that slavery was absolutely a terrible thing. I thought that all men truly were created equal. I compared women with slaves. It upset men at the time, but in many instances, women were treated the same as slaves. They weren't bought and sold, at least not publicly. But I wanted all people to be equal under God. When I got over here, I realized that is exactly the way it is. Anyone that thinks that people of color are different or unable to compete with white people, they're totally wrong. There is no color barrier over here in heaven, and there should be none on earth.
I agree. Why was the campaign for the abolition of slavery and voting rights for the ex-slaves more successful than the campaigns for women's rights?
Men actually felt that it would be easier to get the voting rights for black males than it would be to get voting rights for women. You see, notice I said black males. They weren't talking about giving black women the rights to vote. This was the way of things in the 1800s. Even though we fought the Civil War to free the slaves, they were still not considered truly equal. People realized that it was wrong, but there was still a great discrepancy in how black people were treated versus white people. It wasn't until the 1960s, almost 100 years after the Civil War, that black people truly started to make inroads and to gain the freedoms which they were supposedly given. Especially now, the black males were given freedoms much more rapidly than the women.
Why did famous abolitionists such as Horace Greeley campaign against legislation that would permit divorce in cases of desertion or inhumane treatment of the wife?
Greeley was a very strong abolitionist. He wanted blacks to be given the rights to vote, male blacks, that is. He thought that if any legislation that would interfere with blacks getting the rights was wrong. He wanted the legislation to be passed for people of color. He did not consider women to be the equal of men, and he did not really think that they were that mistreated. Things were much different in those days.
One of our listeners has a question for you, Susan. Do you have any comments on being the first woman featured on a U.S. coin?
I thought it was an incredible honor. The images on coinage has always been reserved for people that had accomplished so much with their lives. I thought that I had done much, but I never really thought that I had totally accomplished my mission. Keep in mind, I passed before women got the right to vote, so I never got to see it. Although I did, I guess, lay a very strong foundation for it. But I was very, very honored when they decided to put my face on a coin.
In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave all men the right to vote. How did this affect your life?
I was very upset. I had fought to have women included in the 15th Amendment. I felt that if men could vote, women should have the same rights. I cannot tell you how upset I was, especially with the Republican Party at the time, because they were taking the leadership in trying to get the vote for the black males. I thought that it was truly an insult, and it did help to recruit more women to help with our cause.
Would you explain how a single woman had more rights than a married woman during this time?
Once you married a man, you essentially gave your rights away to that man. Divorce. It was very, very difficult for a woman to get a divorce, but it was very, very easy for a male to get one, should he so choose. When you married, you basically gave away most of your individual rights. While marriage was the universal institution and all women were supposed to get married, all women were supposed to be obedient to their husbands, they were supposed to listen to them, they were supposed to have their children, they were supposed to run the household. There were many things that a married woman was supposed to do. But the only way that a woman would have any rights at all was to remain single. If she owned property and got married, those property rights would often pass to the husband. But if you stayed single, you could at least maintain making your own decisions in your life.
Okay. What relationship did the Women's Christian Temperance Union have with the women's suffrage movement?
Well, the temperance movement was anti-alcohol. Many, many women in some of the churches organized and fought against alcoholism. Alcohol was the reason that many men mistreated their wives. These wives joined together and formed groups, just the same as we joined together and formed groups in order trying to get the vote and to get more women's rights. So it was like a natural progression that the WCTU and our organizations would join together. Sometimes the fact that women's rights would include temperance hurt our organization. There were many people that would help support us, but had problems with abstinence from alcohol. So there were times it helped and there were times that it hindered.
In 1872, you were arrested for voting. Please tell us about your trial.
This was the first presidential election after the passing of the 15th Amendment. We decided that we would vote. Well, when I did, I was arrested for it. The judge was a true chauvinist. He was very, very upset that we would try to vote and upset the law. He did everything that he could to guarantee that I was guilty. And yes, I voted. Told him I did. He had me found guilty. He never let a jury even discuss the matter. He gave me a large fine. I told him that I would never pay it. He did stop short of having me put in jail because he knew that I had many followers and he knew that that would be a huge mistake on his part. But I was finally, they basically gave up is what they did. Even until I died, I still had that guilty decision against me. So the trial was a farce. That's the only way I could describe it. But it did bring a lot of attention to the fact that we wanted to be able to be treated like males.
Okay. Would you tell us about your relationship with Elizabeth Cady Stanton?
Mrs. Stanton and I were partners in fighting for women's rights. She was a very brilliant person. She would get ideas. She would give them to me. She would often do a lot of the speech writing. We were partners in fighting for women's rights throughout our lives. There were times that we disagreed, but I still considered her one of my best friends ever.
What role did the Bible play in relegating women to secondary status?
There were men that would quote Bible verses in order to prove that women were secondary to men. In the Bible was basically written at a time of male supremacy as well. Women were treated as possessions, well, much the same as they were in the early 1800s. The Bible misquoted. It never truly represented the fact that God feels that men and women are totally equal. The Bible was written at a time of male supremacy, and in those days, it was not uncommon for politicians to quote the Gospels to prove that, in fact, males were superior.
Susan, what steps actually brought success in getting women to attend colleges and universities?
There were many steps. The main thing was convincing individuals in charge of the universities that women deserved a chance. There were many women from wealthy backgrounds, and as our movement grew, these women would play an active role. Sometimes I think that they would have their husbands contribute in order to have the universities or colleges change their entrance requirements. When institutions were all male, it was a fairly simple situation to have housing and accommodations. Once colleges started to accept women, they had to have female dorms, men dorms. It was not a very easy situation for the schools, but political pressure created a situation where many of them started to allow women to attend classes. In the beginning, they would allow them to attend part-time, to sit in on courses. But it did not take long for the professors to understand that a woman can match the intellect of a man and that they deserved equality in the school systems as well.
Okay. Why did it take until 1920 to get the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote?
Because men controlled the political system. Men were electing men to political office. They did not want to have women competing with them in their elections. It was very easy, actually, for them to make the decisions. Now, there were some states that took leadership. By the late 1860s, some of the Western states had allowed women to vote. Once that trend started, then other states started to follow suit. But it was men that controlled the political system. They did not want the competition of women coming in and taking away or running against them. So it was very difficult to overcome the male momentum in the political system.
What role did God play in your life?
God played a very important role in my life. I prayed to him constantly, and he gave me guidance, and he gave me strength. There were many times that we were very mistreated. There would be riots against what we were speaking. There would be very difficult times. As I said, I was a Quaker, and that laid a very, very strong background for my belief in God.
Yeah. What was your opinion on abortion?
I tried not to speak of abortion because I did not want to complicate things. Abortion wasn't really a great big deal at the time. Women had large families. That was just the way of things basically rural communities of America. I truly was opposed to abortion. I wanted men to focus on female equality and female voting rights. I did not want to throw in another situation to complicate what we were trying to accomplish. As you see, abortion today is a very complicated issue, and it really subverts a lot of the attention to other things that women should be accomplishing.
What is your opinion on the state of women's rights today?
Women have accomplished amazing things. My friend here, Mrs. Thatcher, is the prime example of what a woman truly can accomplish. Today, women have equality in education, and that is the key. If a woman is going to truly compete with a man, she has to be educated as well as that man. Even if a woman is highly intelligent, if she doesn't have the facts and the schooling and education to back up that intelligence, it's very, very difficult for her to compete. Today, there's still areas where women need to improve in their rights. Quite often, a man will be chosen over a woman for the same job with the same qualifications. Women often don't make as much as men. So there are still places, but we are seeing women in high political office. We currently have a woman as vice president of the United States. There are women that are running foreign countries. In my time, this would have been totally impossible. So even though there are still doors that have to be opened for women, they have accomplished amazing things.
What do you see as the greatest mistake that you made in your lifetime?
I made many mistakes in my lifetime. I think that I should have attempted to get more men involved with the movement for women's rights. After all, it was men that had the political clout. Quite often, our organizations would simply be those of women. If I had been able to get more men involved, I think that we could have accomplished much more.
I've really enjoyed talking with you. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes, I thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. Women have accomplished so much since my time. We tried very hard to gain equal rights for women. The vote. We understood that there was no way women could be equal if they were not allowed to vote. It is only through political action that things can be accomplished. Today, we're seeing many, many women holding political office. Sometimes we're seeing these women take positions that are considered fairly radical. I think that if women understand that radicalism is basically a turnoff for much of the voting public, I think that if women work on education is the key to the future. If schools help educate the poor woman, intelligence and poverty have no relationship. Some very poor people are some of the most intelligent. I think that women have got to focus on education, education for all, equal education, and equal opportunity. If they do that, the future for women will continue to be very bright. So thank you. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to skip the break. We need to.
Oh, okay. Mrs. Thatcher, you are up next. Thank you for joining us as well. You were born in 1925, and as you were growing up, what was it like in Great Britain for women?
I want to thank you for allowing me to come through and speak tonight. I was born in Great Britain. Women's rights in Britain were a little bit advanced from those in the United States. We had women involvement in politics. Men still basically controlled the greatest decision making. Not unlike the United States, women were not educated as well as men. Education is truly the key to success. It is impossible, or shall we say very improbable, that even the most intelligent woman can compete if she is not educated. Great Britain has had many problems in the early 1920s. Keep in mind that we had borne a lot of the brunt of World War I. A lot of our men had been killed, and women were replacing men when they were at war. So we had seen situations where women were taking greater responsibilities. They had been instrumental in the defense industry. As I was becoming an adult, Hitler was overrunning Europe. They began to bomb Great Britain. Our men were taking the lead in trying to stop Germany. The United States was slow in entering the war. With our men being away, it was very important that women would take more leadership roles. Now keep in mind that once America joined the war and their boys were fighting as well, women jumped in and filled many, many of the defense positions. But Great Britain was just simply more advanced because of certain circumstances and how they treated their women.
Would you tell us about your youth and your education?
I actually got my degree in chemistry. I thought that chemistry would be a good way to earn a living in the future, a good place for women to be accepted. I realized that I was attracted to politics. My husband allowed me to become a barrister, and I used my legal education to run for political office. I was very lucky. I knew that I was fairly intelligent. I knew that chemistry, my education in chemistry, gave me a very deductive way of looking at things. Chemistry makes your mind work on details. I think that my attention to detail through the years in politics was part of what made me very successful. In chemistry, things go according to rules. I had my rules. I was conservative. I wanted to try to help the people, and I tried to follow those rules. Sometimes they told me that I was very bullheaded, that I refused to compromise. But I think in many instances, my sticking to my beliefs is what really helped make me successful.
That was an amazing jump from chemistry to politics. What was it that got you interested in politics, other than the fact that you obviously were going to be very good at it?
I decided that I wanted to help people. It was just basically that simple.
Okay. What was the basis for your conservative beliefs?
My parents had a conservative background. I watched the trend towards socialism in Great Britain. The war had had a great effect on many people. It was a time where many of the countries had been overthrown during World War I. We were spending beyond our ability to collect money. Great Britain was living with great inflation at the time. The spending, that was a huge part of it. I felt that we had to reduce spending. We were wasting a lot of money at the time. Conservatives are more apt not to spend as much money, although we are seeing not much difference in political systems today. But in my time, a conservative basically tried to conserve spending, while the Liberal Party would be more liberal in their spending. So some things have changed, but I still believe that a conservative outlook is what's preferable.
How did male prejudice affect your career?
The males felt that it would be very difficult for a woman to be strong enough to take over as prime minister. I had to prove that I had the strength to do it. Keep in mind that the males made all the great decisions. If you look at the Yalta Conference after World War II, it was all made by males. Leadership was traditionally male. It was very, very hard to convince the male population that I was capable of not only standing up to them, but to be able to handle debate that would defeat many of the males in politics.
So what changes happened that brought about their opinions in women in politics becoming more positive?
The fact that I proved that I could stand with them. There were other women running for political office that were very capable as well. I showed that I deserved what positions were given to me. Believe me, in those days, there were no political gifts.
Okay, I hope I pronounced this correctly. What was your view of the Keynesian economics?
Keynesian economics.
Keynesian.
Keynesian, John Maynard Keynes was a proponent of spending. He felt that spending stimulated growth. He felt that spending would allow equality in schools, that basically deficits were a good thing. I was conservative and I disagreed. I felt that his teachings had actually harmed our country. I felt that the great spending was responsible for our unemployment. and for our high rate of inflation. If you look today, you'll see that the printing of money and huge deficits is what is behind your great rate of current inflation. It will not be until your government stops spending at this greater rate and that the economy slows and they stop printing money that your inflation will come under control.
I totally agree with you on that. When did you first believe that you could be the prime minister?
Well, when I was young, I felt that a woman would never be prime minister because of male prejudice. As I managed to advance in my political offices and my political appointed positions, I realized that I could compete with the men. I would say that it was probably 20 years before I took over the position as prime minister that I realized that I would be capable of doing it.
Okay. You were prime minister during the latter part of the Cold War. What do you think was the major factor that contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union?
The Soviet Union spent way too much money on military defense. It caused much poverty and grief. The Soviet Union was basically landlocked. The democracies of the world stood strong. They showed the Russian people the high standard of life, of living, that the democracies were practicing. The people finally decided that they would pressure their government for some of the good things in life. And as a result, the Soviet Union fell.
Okay. Would you share with us how you got the title of the Iron Lady?
I was very strong-willed. Some said bullheaded. I prefer strong-willed. I would follow what I said I was going to do. Quite often I would stand firmly. I would not change my mind. And I would force others to accept what I wanted rather than compromise. I don't think that many thought of the term Iron Lady as a compliment.
Okay. What was it like to be the most powerful lady in the world?
I never really thought about it like that. All I wanted to do was to help the people of Great Britain prosper. I wanted to keep them safe. The Cold War was a terrible thing. We had to spend much money on our military. The threat of nuclear destruction was with us every day. I knew it was a great responsibility. I knew I had to correspond with other world leaders, and I knew that I had to work with them. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States, and he was a wonderful leader. He and I became good friends, and many of our ideas on governing were the same. So, yes, I had a lot of power, but I never really considered myself the most powerful lady in the world. I considered myself a servant of the people of Great Britain. Great Britain was one of the major countries of the world, and I was its leader. So I believe that I did what I wanted to do.
How did you get along with the Queen?
Not real well. The Queen represented the monarchy. I represented more of a democratic style of government. It's very difficult to operate when you have a monarch. Even though the monarch was becoming a figurehead, the Queen was continuously trying to gain more power and strength. So we had many disagreements, but she is a wonderful lady, and we had many agreements as well.
What is your opinion of labor unions?
I was very much against labor unions. I felt that they were a negative influence. I felt that they were instrumental in driving inflation. There were many times that they would threaten to strike nationwide to get higher wages. And every time you had higher wages, it affects the cost of living. In many ways, unions are good. They certainly help defend the workers. But when they make outrageous demands, we had to stand up to them.
As you watch from the other side, what is your opinion of the current government in Great Britain?
Currently, there is so much dissension and lack of cooperation in the government in Great Britain, just the same as there is in the United States. Great Britain needs to compromise in many of their ideals. They need to stand together, and they need to decide what is best for the people. Until the politicians learn to cooperate, there will be many, many problems in the future for the government of Great Britain.
Do you agree that they should separate from the European Union?
In the beginning, I thought that the European Union was a good thing. But then I saw that the Union was simply becoming another bureaucracy that was more interested in control and power than it was to do what was right for the member states. I do believe that Great Britain is doing the proper thing in separating from the EU, but I do think that they need to remain with strong relationships, strong trade agreements, but Great Britain is capable of standing alone. They've done it for many, many years before. And if the government cooperates with one another, it can be a good move.
What was your opinion of Mikhail Gorbachev?
President Reagan told me that Gorbachev was going to be the answer to defeating the Soviet Union and for their downfall. I did not trust him at first, but as events started to take place, I realized that he was truly the answer. I thought that Gorbachev turned out to be a great leader for Russia. The government turned on him after the downfall, but I do not think that the Soviet Union would have ceased to exist as rapidly without Gorbachev.
What are your thoughts on Harry and Meghan?
I think Harry and Meghan are behaving as spoiled children. There is a lot of things I don't like about the monarchy, but there is a lot of good that can come from being a member of the royal family. They have sown a lot of dissension. They feel that their personal fame is more important. If they were going to leave the royal family, that is fine. But for them to create all of this dissension, I think that creates a lot of problems for Great Britain in general.
Today, you're watching the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you were currently Prime Minister of Great Britain, would you do anything different?
Yes, I would take a stronger position. Now, Great Britain is doing a good job in furnishing weapons. I would give the Ukraine whatever weapons they required to drive the invaders out of their country. Ukraine is totally innocent. They did nothing. NATO did nothing to instigate this war. I would give them long-range artillery, and I would give them modern aircraft. I would give them what they need to defeat Russia as rapidly as possible.
Do you think Russia will use nuclear weapons?
I do not think they're that insane. The use of nuclear weapons would destroy the country. Why would a military officer make a decision that would guarantee the death of his entire family? Mutual destruction is a terrible thing, but I believe that mutual destruction is the only thing that will deter Russia. They have weakened their military through the years. They have stolen from the people. They have done many, many things. I think it remains to be seen just how effective Russia's true nuclear capability is.
What country do you consider the greatest risk to the free world today?
I think that Iran, being on the edge of having a nuclear weapon, creates the greatest danger to the free world and democracies. There are religious fanatics in Iran that would use that weapon to destroy Israel or any of the other Christian countries of the world. There is sanity in other countries. While China is an incredible risk, I think they have enough common sense not to become involved in an all-out war. Iran is influencing many, many other countries in Europe. They're causing a lot of conflict, and the fact that they will soon have the nuclear weapon is a terrible, terrible risk.
How would you handle the nuclear threat of Iran?
I would try to use my secret services and those cooperate with Israel to try to do as much as I could to destroy their nuclear facilities by sabotage. I would try to do what I could to make sure that the nuclear threat is eliminated. Should they continue on this path, I fear that it will become necessary to take direct military action. There are madmen in charge of that government, and they have to be stopped.
How would you handle the threat of China?
China has got many internal problems. I would start by slowing down trade with China. China is dependent upon trade with the democracies of the world. They have a huge population to feed and to keep employed. If trade becomes a weapon, I think that China will find great difficulties. I know that the leaders of China are very calculating. They do not believe that the free world has the will to stop trading with them. The free world has got to stop catering, has got to stop purchasing their goods, and has got to treat them as the enemy that they are.
Do you see Ronald Reagan now that you're both on the other side?
Absolutely. Ronnie and I were great friends in life, and we're great friends over here.
That's great. What do you see as the future of Putin?
Putin has made the major mistake of his lifetime. He overestimated his military, and now he has shown the world that his military is a paper tiger. Putin's time is limited. In Russia, when you make such mistakes, you generally pay for it with your life, and I do not think this will be any exception.
What do you see as your greatest mistake as the Prime Minister?
There were times that I made mistakes. I should have done more for the people. There are times as Prime Minister gets influenced to not do what is best. If I had always had the thought of the common person as foremost, I think that my popularity, even though it would come and go, would have remained high.
Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. You're a very wise woman. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes, I want to thank you for allowing me to come through tonight. The world has many, many problems. The world had many, many problems when I served as Prime Minister. We were in the Cold War. Today you're in a hot war in Ukraine. Russia has decided that they want to take military actions against the free countries of the world. Russia's decided that they should be allowed to conquer whatever country they want to take. It is a time where you have to stand up to evil. It is always a time where you have to stand up to evil. Evil hasn't changed, it's grown. In my time, there was much evil, just as there's much evil now. Do what's right. Do what is best for the people. And think long term. China's great strength is they plan 20, 30 years in advance. The democracies have got to join together, and they have got to plan long term for their own safety. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for letting me still speak. If you ever wish to talk to me again, I can assure you that the Iron Lady will return.
That's great news.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Next week, little change of pace. We're going to explore death and near-death experiences. We're going to channel with the Archangel Azrael. That's the archangel that assists souls in passing, as well as the souls of some famous people that will tell us what it was like at their time of death. We'll hear from Steve Jobs. He was an agnostic. When he passed, his final words were, "Oh, wow, oh, wow." We're going to find out what he saw. And we're going to try to talk to Robin Williams, who committed suicide. I've never channeled anyone that told me what it was like when they returned after committing suicide. So it should be very interesting next week. It should be a learning experience for all of us. We have a new podcast. It's on Voice America. It's called Spirits Speak, Exploring the Afterlife. It's on Tuesday mornings, 9 o'clock Pacific time. Go to the Voice America Radio Network, and you will find that we will be there for an hour on Tuesday mornings. So, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate that you take time to listen. We appreciate that you tell your friends about our show. And we truly appreciate Parax for allowing us to speak. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being there for us.
And I would also like to thank you all for being here with us this evening. And I'd like to thank our two guests. They were fantastic. I want you all to have a wonderful week. God bless you all.
Thanks for listening to Channeling History. Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.